the vanishing point, when growth becomes isolation. There's a strange kind of silence that enters your life when you begin to grow. It doesn't happen suddenly. It begins quietly, so quietly that you almost don't notice it at first. The messages slow down, the calls become less frequent, the laughter that once filled your days begins to echo faintly in memory, and before you realize it, the crowd that once surrounded you begins to thin. No one announces their departure. They simply drift away, as if some invisible force has drawn a line between who you were and who you're becoming. Growth, in its purest form, is an act of separation. Every step toward clarity distances you from confusion. Every moment of awakening distances you from the sleepwalkers. It's not arrogance, it's evolution, and evolution by its very nature isolates. Humans are social creatures. We are wired to belong, to seek comfort in the familiarity of the tribe. From our earliest ancestors huddled around the fire, safety was never found in truth. It was found in sameness. To think differently was to risk exile. To act differently was to threaten the fragile equilibrium of the group. That instinct hasn't vanished. It has only evolved with us. We still crave belonging, even when it means shrinking ourselves to fit into spaces that no longer have room for our full selves. When you begin to level up, whether it's mentally, spiritually, or financially, you begin to threaten the balance, not intentionally, but by existing differently. Your transformation becomes a mirror, reflecting back to others what they haven't yet faced within themselves. And that reflection is uncomfortable. It forces them to question their own stagnation, their own fears, their own avoidance of change. Nietzsche once wrote about the loneliness of the higher man, the one who dares to rise above the herd. He observed that the path of self-overcoming is not crowded, because few are willing to bear its solitude. To ascend is to lose the comfort of being understood, and so as you climb, conversations begin to feel hollow. The small talk that once flowed easily now feels forced. The topics that once bound you together no longer resonate. You start to see the invisible walls, how much of what you once called connection was built on shared limitation. It's a strange realization that much of human bonding is not about love or alignment, but about shared comfort zones. When you step outside of them, you break the unspoken contract. You are no longer one of us. You're something else, something uncertain, something they can't categorize. And uncertainty makes people disappear, not because they wish you harm, but because your evolution disrupts their sense of stability. You remind them, often without words, that they too could change, but haven't. You represent what they fear, transformation without permission. At first, this isolation feels like loss. You grieve the old connections, the shared laughter, the feeling of being understood. But over time, you begin to realize that the silence left behind isn't empty, it's spacious. It's room for something deeper, truer, more aligned with who you're becoming. Growth strips away illusion. It reveals the fragile scaffolding of relationships built on familiarity rather than truth. It shows you how often love was actually dependency and loyalty was just mutual stagnation. So people don't really disappear when you level up. The truth is harsher and more liberating. They were never standing beside you. They were standing beside who you used to be. When that version of you fades, so do they. And in that realization lies a haunting kind of peace. Because you finally understand that growth doesn't just change what you have, it changes what you can hold. The higher you rise, the fewer hands you can carry with you, but the ones that remain, those who grow with you, not against you, become sacred. The hidden contract, the psychology of stagnation. Every relationship, whether we realize it or not, is bound by an invisible contract, not one written in ink or spoken aloud, but one formed in comfort, predictability, and mutual understanding of who we are supposed to be. You become a character in someone else's story, the quiet one, the dependable one, the dreamer, the rebel, the friend who never changes too much, the one who always listens but never outgrows. And as long as you keep playing that role, the balance remains intact. The hidden contract holds. But the moment you begin to grow, when you start asking deeper questions, setting new boundaries, or refusing to play your old part, you break that contract. You don't mean to, but you do, because growth is change, and change threatens stability. Psychologically, this moment activates a powerful defense mechanism in others: cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort that arises when reality no longer fits the story we've told ourselves. If you once shared the same frustrations, the same habits, the same worldview, and suddenly you don't, those around you face a choice: evolve with you or reject you to protect their sense of self. And most people choose rejection because evolution requires effort. It demands self-confrontation. Carl Jung called this confrontation shadow work, the process of facing the darker, hidden parts of the psyche that we prefer to ignore. When someone close to us evolves, it shines light on those shadows. We're forced to see the parts of ourselves we've neglected: the fears, the laziness, the envy, the resignation, and instead of facing that light, we often turn away from its source. That's why friendships fade. That's why families clash. That's why partners grow distant. It's not always betrayal or cruelty. It's the mind's instinctive need to preserve its narrative of who it is. People say, "You've changed," as if it were an accusation. What they really mean is, "You've disrupted the image I built of you, the version that made me comfortable." This is the hidden contract of human connection. I will accept you as long as you don't make me question myself. In Freud's terms, we might call this a narcissistic injury, the psychological wound that occurs when our self-image is challenged. Watching someone grow beyond us reminds us that our own potential remains unused, our own evolution postponed, and instead of feeling inspired, we often feel insulted. History is full of examples: artists, thinkers, and innovators who were cast out not because they were wrong, but because they dared to break the unspoken rules of their time. Socrates was condemned for corrupting the youth. Galileo was silenced for revealing inconvenient truths. Van Gogh was isolated not for lack of talent, but for seeing the world in colors others couldn't yet comprehend. Humanity has always punished deviation, not because the deviation was evil, but because it exposed the comfort of the collective lie. And this happens on a personal level every day. When you stop gossiping, people say you've become distant. When you start pursuing your purpose, they say you've changed. When you start valuing your peace, they say you've grown cold. But all you've done is stop participating in dysfunction. The irony is that growth, what should be celebrated, is often perceived as betrayal, because you didn't just change your habits, you changed the social order. You shifted the emotional economy that kept everyone comfortable. Psychologically, humans crave equilibrium. The moment one member of a system changes, the rest feel compelled to pull them back to restore balance. It's not malicious. It's instinctive. But here lies the deeper truth. Equilibrium is not peace. It's just sameness. And sameness, over time, becomes stagnation. When you start to grow, you expose that stagnation. You reveal how much of what we call connection is actually a mutual agreement not to evolve. And that realization hurts, not just for you, but for everyone around you. So people disappear, they distance themselves, they create narratives to justify it. You're different now, you think you're better, you've changed. But beneath all those words is something simpler, quieter, and far more human. You remind me of what I'm afraid to become, and that's the tragedy of growth. It doesn't just transform you, it transforms how others must see themselves. Yet there's a hidden beauty in this unraveling too, because when the old contracts break, new ones can form, ones not based on comfort, but on truth, relationships rooted not in sameness, but in mutual evolution. Growth is not self-improvement, it's social rebellion, it's the quiet, unstoppable act of rewriting the contracts that keep the human spirit small, and in that rebellion you begin to see the difference between those who loved your potential and those who only loved your limits. Mirrors and shadows, how people reflect our unresolved selves. Every person we meet is a mirror. Some reflect our beauty, our kindness, our potential. Others reflect the parts of ourselves we try to forget, the impatience, the envy, the fear. But whether we like what we see or not, every connection is a reflection. When you begin to grow, those mirrors start to change. The reflections distort. The image others see in you no longer confirms the story they tell themselves. And that's when tension begins to rise. Carl Jung described this inner realm as the shadow, the collection of traits, impulses, and emotions we repress because they don't fit our ideal self-image. We bury them deep, but they never truly die. Instead, they hide in the people around us. When someone levels up, becomes disciplined, self-aware, successful, or peaceful, they trigger the shadows of those who haven't yet faced their own. Their light reveals what others have buried, and for many that's unbearable. That's why personal evolution often feels like confrontation. Even when you're not fighting anyone, you simply existing differently becomes enough to unsettle the equilibrium. It's not that people consciously choose to turn against you, it's that at a subconscious level, your growth becomes a psychological mirror, and they can't look for long. Imagine two friends who once shared the same fears, the same late-night complaints, the same quiet resignation toward life. One of them begins to change, starts waking up earlier, reading, creating, or simply thinking differently. Suddenly, what once bonded them begins to dissolve. One sees inspiration, the other sees accusation. In that reflection, the second friend doesn't just see the other's growth, he sees his own stagnation, and so, instead of admiration, what arises is resentment. The philosopher Søren Kierkegaard once said, "People demand freedom of speech as a compensation for the freedom of thought which they seldom use." The same applies here. People praise authenticity until they meet someone who truly embodies it, because real authenticity disrupts illusion. It forces everyone nearby to confront their own performance. History is filled with figures who became living mirrors of their age, people who reflected uncomfortable truths back to society. Socrates questioned false wisdom and was sentenced to death. Galileo revealed a universe that didn't revolve around humanity, and humanity turned its back. Van Gogh painted emotions in color so raw that the world called him mad. In each case, the mirror was too clear, too honest, too confronting. The people around them didn't hate them for who they were. They hated the way their existence shattered the illusion of normalcy. This dynamic plays out quietly in everyday life. The friend who distances himself when you start achieving. The sibling who mocks your new habits, the partner who subtly sabotages your growth. On the surface, it looks like conflict. Beneath it, it's projection. They are wrestling not with you, but with the part of themselves they see in you. Growth then becomes a psychological revolution. It's not just about bettering yourself. It's about forcing everyone around you to reevaluate who they are. You become the test they didn't ask for. But here lies the paradox. Mirrors don't choose what they reflect. You don't cause people's discomfort. You only reveal it. The hostility that arises when you level up is rarely personal. It's archetypal. It's the ancient tension between the self that wants to evolve and the shadow that clings to comfort. And so when people pull away, it's not always rejection, it's avoidance. They're not walking away from you, they're walking away from the truth you've come to embody. Over time, you begin to understand that not every lost connection is tragedy. Some are mirrors that have served their purpose. They showed you who you were, who you've become, and who you can no longer be. When you level up, you stop being a mirror of comfort and become a mirror of confrontation. And in that shift, you discover one of life's most unsettling truths. Not everyone wants to see themselves clearly. Evolution versus belonging, the ancient conflict. From the moment we are born, belonging becomes a matter of survival. Before words, before thought, before individuality, the human infant understands one thing: connection keeps you alive. To be accepted is to be safe. To be rejected is to die. This primal law has never truly left us. It simply evolved, disguised in modern clothing, hidden beneath our cities, our screens, our careers. The tribal instinct still beats quietly beneath the noise of civilization. We crave approval because, deep down, our biology still equates disconnection with death. And this is where the tension begins, the timeless conflict between evolution and belonging. For most of human history, survival required sameness. The tribe functioned through conformity. Shared beliefs created unity. Shared fear created loyalty. To question, to think differently, to act beyond the group's comfort was to risk exile. In a world of predators and scarcity, exile meant the end. But what happens when the threat is no longer lions or famine, but the fear of being misunderstood? What happens when the cost of safety is the slow death of your potential? That's the paradox of modern life. Our instincts haven't evolved as fast as our environments. We live in an age that celebrates individuality, but still punishes deviation. We are told to be ourselves, but only if ourselves fits the narrative. The philosopher Nietzsche called this tension the struggle between the herd and the higher man. The herd survives by consensus. The higher man lives by conviction. And history shows time and again how the herd responds to those who rise too far above it. Socrates questioned the illusions of Athenian virtue and was sentenced to drink poison. Giordano Bruno expanded the universe beyond human importance and was burned at the stake. Galileo dared to look through a telescope and saw a truth that the church refused to see. Each of them stepped beyond belonging. Each paid the price for evolution, and yet through their isolation, humanity evolved. This is the cruel symmetry of progress. Every leap forward requires a fall from acceptance. Every act of awakening threatens the collective dream. The individual who grows too aware, too free, too independent becomes a danger, not because they wish to harm, but because they expose the fragility of the system that depends on sameness. Our modern tribes may no longer wear animal skins or gather around campfires, but they are everywhere. Online communities, political movements, fandoms, religions, workplaces. Each has its rituals, its language, its unspoken rules of belonging. Each promises identity in exchange for obedience. But the moment you evolve beyond their ideology, when you begin to think freely, question dogma, or detach from emotional dependency, you are marked as a traitor. The same instinct that once guarded us from physical death now guards us from social exile. This explains why so many people remain stuck in environments that drain them, friend groups that no longer align, jobs that suffocate their potential, belief systems that no longer make sense. The fear of losing belonging overrides the hunger for growth. We tell ourselves we value truth, but we often value comfort more. We want to awaken, but not if it means being alone. Yet this is the unavoidable law of evolution. The higher the consciousness, the thinner the air. Few can breathe where truth lives. Even now, modern society still punishes transcendence, though in subtler ways. Today, you might not be burned at the stake, but you will be unfollowed, silenced, ridiculed, dismissed. The methods change, the instinct remains. Society defends its illusions with the same primitive ferocity it once used to defend its territory. When you level up, mentally, spiritually, or morally, you begin to see through the collective hallucination that keeps most people comfortable. You start to recognize that normal is often just a euphemism for numb, but understanding this brings a quiet kind of freedom, because once you see the pattern, you stop taking rejection personally. You begin to understand that resistance is the shadow of evolution. It follows every step forward. In truth, humanity's progress depends on those willing to be misunderstood. Every age needs its outcasts, its thinkers, its creators, its truth-tellers, because only they dare to break the spell of belonging. It's not easy. To evolve is to lose the warmth of the tribe, to step into the cold of individuality. It feels like isolation, but it is, in fact, initiation. The beginning of true independence, the kind that no group can give and no group can take away. So when people disappear as you grow, when the world begins to look at you differently, remember, this is not failure. It is the oldest story in human history, the one written into our DNA. The tribe loves your potential until it begins to outgrow theirs. And when that moment comes, you must choose, belong, or become. The modern mask, growth in the age of algorithms. Once, exile meant being cast out of the tribe. Today, exile is quieter. It happens behind screens, in the silence of group chats, in the vanishing of likes and the absence of messages that used to come instantly. It's not the sword that cuts us now, it's the algorithm. We live in an age that claims to celebrate authenticity, yet thrives on illusion. Every platform, every profile, every digital identity is built upon a carefully curated mask, a projection of who we want to be seen as, rather than who we truly are. The system doesn't reward truth, it rewards engagement. It doesn't amplify depth, it amplifies noise. And when you begin to level up, when you start thinking, speaking, or creating outside the acceptable bandwidth of collective opinion, the algorithm turns against you. You stop appearing, you stop being seen, you become invisible. This is not coincidence. It is the natural extension of a psychological pattern as old as humanity itself. The digital world, for all its innovation, still mirrors the same tribal instincts of ancient times. Conformity ensures inclusion. Dissent ensures exile. Only now, exile is not physical, it's algorithmic. Every scroll, every click, every post teaches the machine who you are. But what it really learns is who you're allowed to be. If If you express something that doesn't fit your digital tribe, you're quietly shadowed, punished not with confrontation but with silence. And in that silence, you begin to feel something eerily familiar, the loneliness of evolution. This is the paradox of the modern mask. We have never been more connected, yet never more afraid of standing alone. We post, we share, we perform, all while losing the ability to be unseen without feeling irrelevant. The dopamine drip of validation has replaced the primal warmth of belonging. Social media has turned attention into currency and authenticity into liability. The more genuine you become, the less marketable you appear. The more you grow, the less you fit the mold. This is why people disappear when you level up, not just in real life, but online too. The version of you that once mirrored their insecurities or comforted their sameness no longer performs the role they expect. Your growth breaks the narrative they followed you for. The influencer who stops pretending, the friend who stops posting for approval, the thinker who questions the collective script. Each becomes a threat, not to the audience, but to the illusion that binds them. In a sense, the algorithm doesn't silence you. It only reflects what society already does. It favors repetition over revelation, performance over transformation. And yet the irony remains. People say they crave truth. They want real voices, unfiltered ideas, unpolished honesty. But the moment they encounter it, they scroll past. Because truth doesn't entertain, it confronts. The modern self has become addicted to reflection rather than introspection, to being seen rather than being known. We don't just wear masks, we become them. And when someone dares to take theirs off, the rest turn away, unable to face their own disguise. In this digital theater, growth feels like erasure. You stop playing the character and the audience disappears. But perhaps that's not tragedy, it's transformation. The people who fade away were only ever applauding the act, not the actor. What emerges after the silence is something purer, connection not built on algorithms, but on resonance. The few who remain are those who see you, not your performance. They are the ones who recognize that the human voice, stripped of pretense, carries more weight than 1,000 curated images. To level up in the age of algorithms is to choose invisibility over imitation, integrity over impression. It means letting go of the illusion that being seen equals being real. And when the noise fades and the crowd thins, you begin to experience something rare in the digital age: stillness. In that stillness, you rediscover the essence of connection, not through data, but through depth. In the end, disappearance is not the death of relevance. It is the rebirth of authenticity. In a world built on algorithms, to grow is to vanish, but to vanish in truth is to finally return to reality. The quiet rebellion, choosing depth over approval. There comes a point in every journey of growth when you stop waiting for people to understand you. You stop defending your evolution. You stop trying to fit your expansion into the small shapes that once kept you safe. And in that moment, a quiet rebellion begins. It doesn't look dramatic. There's no grand announcement, no confrontation, no need to prove anything. It happens silently. An inward shift, a subtle detachment from the constant need for approval. You realize that validation is the most seductive form of control, and the freedom you've been seeking isn't found in being liked, but in being whole. For the first time, solitude doesn't scare you. It feels clean, necessary, sacred. This is where depth begins to replace approval, where the opinions of others begin to sound like background noise faint echoes of a world you no longer belong to. The Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard wrote that the crowd is untruth. He understood that truth rarely survives where popularity thrives, because the crowd lives in compromise. It moves with emotion, not reflection. It demands conformity disguised as connection. To choose depth is to step out of that current. It means you will often walk alone, not because you reject others, but because most are still seeking what you've stopped needing. The great thinkers and mystics have all faced this solitude. Emerson called it self-reliance, a state in which one learns to trust their own inner compass, even when the world turns away. Viktor Frankl spoke of finding meaning in suffering, of using isolation not as a prison, but as a crucible for self-discovery. Each of them understood the same paradox. To belong fully to yourself, you must first risk belonging to no one else. And so, you begin to notice how silence becomes your teacher. The more you detach from noise, the more clearly you hear the faint hum of truth underneath it all. You realize that loneliness was never your enemy. It was the empty space required for transformation. The need for constant affirmation begins to dissolve. You stop measuring your worth through visibility. You stop explaining your peace to those still addicted to chaos. There is power in withholding, power in choosing not to react, not to explain, not to shrink. Because silence is not weakness, it's discipline, the refusal to waste your energy convincing those committed to misunderstanding you. And this is where growth becomes rebellion, not the loud revolutionary kind that demands to be seen, but the quiet, invisible kind that no one applauds. The kind that says, I will not trade authenticity for acceptance. I will not bend truth for comfort. I will not dilute myself to remain digestible. The world calls this arrogance, but it is, in fact, self-respect. As you grow, you begin to see how many people mistake attention for love, chaos for passion, and validation for purpose. You stop chasing what you once thought you needed, and in that space, you encounter something far more profound. Peace, the kind of peace that doesn't depend on anyone's permission, the kind of peace that survives misunderstanding, absence, and silence. And so, what began as loss starts to feel like liberation. You understand that solitude isn't the price of growth, it's the reward. Because once you've learned to be enough on your own, no one's absence can take that away. This is the quiet rebellion, the refusal to return to smallness, the silent act of choosing depth over approval, truth over performance, peace over noise. And though the world may never applaud it, your soul will. The return of silence, the power of withholding. There is a kind of silence that feels heavy, the kind that follows endings, misunderstandings, departures. It's the silence of absence, of spaces once filled, now empty. But beyond that lies another kind of silence, one not born of loss, but of mastery. The silence that arrives when you no longer need to prove anything, when you've leveled up enough times. You begin to understand that truth doesn't always need to be spoken, growth doesn't always need to be displayed. Wisdom doesn't always need to be shared. There comes a point when your very presence becomes the message and words only dilute it. In earlier stages, you tried to explain yourself to those who doubted your intentions, misunderstood your evolution, or questioned your motives. You thought that if they could just see your perspective, they'd stay. But growth teaches you something far more profound. Understanding is not everyone's destiny. Some people are meant only to witness your transformation from a distance, not to walk beside you through it. So you stop explaining, you stop overextending, you stop defending your peace as if it were on trial. You learn that silence is not emptiness, it is containment. The ability to hold your truth quietly without the need for validation or reaction. This is the return of silence, the moment when noise loses its power over you. The arguments that once consumed your mind now feel irrelevant. The attention that once fed you now feels hollow. The company that once distracted you now feels unnecessary. You begin to understand that withholding is not withdrawal, it's refinement. You become deliberate with your energy, selective with your access, intentional with your words. You no longer speak to be heard. You speak to create impact. You no longer move to be seen. You move to be aligned. And the fewer explanations you give, the more peaceful life becomes. Because silence, unlike words, cannot be distorted. It cannot be debated, twisted, or misinterpreted. It simply is. There's a quiet power in restraint, in choosing not to react when provoked, not to announce every milestone, not to prove every truth. In that restraint, you reclaim your energy from the endless cycle of justification and misunderstanding. You realize that those meant to understand will feel your evolution without needing it explained, and those who don't never would have, no matter how many words you used. So you let go. You disappear, not in defeat, but in elevation. You leave behind the noise of validation and ascend into the stillness of self-assurance. Because sometimes the highest form of communication is silence. The deepest form of love is distance, and the truest form of strength is withholding. You didn't lose them when you grew, you simply lost the version of yourself that needed them. And in that loss, you found something far greater, the unshakable peace that comes when you finally realize that silence isn't emptiness, it's completion.